Good evening. We start tonight with new revelations from millions of leaked documents known as the Paradise Papers, which show how some corporations and individuals try to avoid paying taxes. The technology giant Apple has been managing most of its untaxed cash reserve offshore on the Channel Island of Jersey. It moved the money to Jersey after a tax loophole in Ireland was closed. Although the company has done nothing illegal, its tax arrangements have been criticised by EU and US officials. The Paradise Papers were obtained by the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung and shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which does include the BBC's Panorama, as our business editor Simon Jack explains.
A rapturous reception for the latest iPhone. It's the most popular and profitable consumer product of all time. It's generated hundreds of billions in profits for Apple since it was introduced 10 years ago. What these papers show is just how determined Apple has been to keep the tax bill on those profits as low as possible, and how keen some governments, lawyers and advisors have been to help them do it. For many years, Apple sent profits made outside the Americas to Ireland, where an elaborate corporate structure meant it paid nearly no tax on the billions it was making. Taxes that would have been due to the United States, where politicians started applying pressure to a defiant Apple CEO, Tim Cook.
We pay all the taxes we owe, every single dollar. We not only comply with the laws, but we comply with the spirit of the laws. We don't depend on tax gimmicks.
So, no more fiendishly complex tax arrangements, right? Wrong. Documents obtained from the law firm Appleby, based in Bermuda, show that when Ireland shut that scheme down, the company went shopping for a new way to keep their tax bills low. A questionnaire was sent to Appleby's offices in 7 tax havens, all British, including questions that made their intention clear. Can you confirm that an Irish company, meaning an Apple subsidiary, can conduct management activities without being subject to taxation in your jurisdiction? After this offshore beauty parade, Apple plumped for Jersey, and company accounts published since show there's been no discernible increase in the rate of tax paid worldwide. Now, let's be clear, Apple has done nothing illegal, but hundreds of billions of dollars remain tangled in a web of low-tax jurisdictions seemingly beyond the reach of any government, the tax equivalent of outer space. And as these documents show, this is a system that has continually eluded international attempts to reform it.
Thank you.
The boss of the international organisation trying to fix this problem admits it's a work in progress.
Changing the rules that make it legal that today many of these companies actually pay very little or no taxes at all. This is what it's about, this is what is happening, and this is what we are working on.
Apple actually pays a lot of tax, more than any other company in the world, but not as much as many think it should. It's also not alone. Other multinationals use similar structures, and US companies alone are estimated to have over $2 trillion stashed offshore. The Paradise Papers show the lengths to which they and their advisors are prepared to go to keep their tax bills low. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Well, as we've heard from Simon there, the documents came from a law firm based in Bermuda called Appleby, which says that hackers obtained access to its files. The Paradise Papers reveal, among other things, that the Formula 1 champion, Lewis Hamilton, avoided VAT on a luxury jet that he'd bought by registering it in the Isle of Man. And 3 of the stars in the popular BBC show Mrs. Brown's Boys had their wages paid offshore. Panorama's Richard Bilton has been looking through the documents and has this report.
When you hear tax haven, you might think palm trees. They're not all like that. We've arrived in a little place in between Belfast and Liverpool. This is the Isle of Man. It's a British Crown dependency, and it's an important tax haven. And we have found that the island offers a special service that the rich and famous love. Hamilton is world champion. Take Formula 1 world champion Lewis Hamilton. In 2013, he made a dream purchase, a £16 million jet. The Isle of Man gave him back £3.3 million as a VAT refund. Lewis Hamilton had to fly his jet here to the Isle of Man just once. He came here in 2012 with his then girlfriend, the pop star Nicole Scherzinger. And our documents show that Customs and Excise here were happy to come in early at 6 in the morning to sign off on the VAT deal. There are nearly 1,000 jets registered here. We believe they come here because the Isle of Man don't properly apply the European Union and UK rules. Now, those rules are very complicated, but if you use your plane for fun, you can't get VAT refunds.
I can't believe I have my own plane still after all these years.
Look at this post. Lewis Hamilton is open about using it for fun. He shouldn't have got a full refund.
If they're using it for private purposes, the fact that all this money is being refunded is quite shocking. You should not be getting VAT back if it's private usage, and you're getting VAT back.
Lewis Hamilton's lawyers told us he had a set of professionals in place who run most aspects of his business operations, and they said Isle of Man Customs gave informed approval to the scheme. In total, the Isle of Man has handed out more than £790 million in VAT refunds to jet leasing companies. Isle of Man Customs has admitted it's given refunds for personal use of jets as long as it's mainly used for business. That shouldn't happen. As a result of our investigation, they've called in the British government to review its procedures. The Paradise Papers show there are other secrets on this island. We've found evidence that shows just how far the Isle of Man government has been prepared to go to help tax dodgers. The European Savings Directive was an attempt to stop tax evasion across Europe. We found evidence that the Isle of Man changed one of their laws to help people dodge the new tax. Now, you might think getting approval for something that could help tax evaders will prove difficult. Not on the Isle of Man. We have letters from lawyers to the island's regulator. If you believe it would be helpful for us to provide you with ideas as to how to amend the regulations, please let Simon and myself know. Now, in Switzerland, I tracked down the man who drew up that scheme to help tax dodgers. Now, I want to show you something. The one that needed the Isle of Man to change the law. It's actually changing the laws, the Isle of Man changing their own laws, so this scheme to help tax evaders can work, isn't it?
I would agree with you, yes.
That is amazing to me. That is amazing to me. The Isle of Man's top politician, the Chief Minister, has promised to investigate our allegations and apologise if the law was changed for tax dodgers. But what about the regulator himself? Did you change the law, sir, to help tax dodgers? He's retired now. I tracked him down. No, sir, I think you should help us with this. It was the European Savings Directive, and you changed the law.
I've nothing to say.
What do you say to our viewers who pay their tax?
I've no comment to that. I've said that the responsibilities were transferred to the Financial Services Authority, and you should contact them.
Hiya, Mummy.
But the Paradise Papers have more than faceless financial deals.
Oh, hello, love. Do you want a cup of tea?
We think 3 actors in Mrs. Brown's Boys are involved in a tax dodge.
I could do with some money to get us a place.
Patrick Houlihan, who plays Mrs. Brown's son Dermot.
You look like you could have stayed in bed a bit longer, Maria. Yeah.
Fiona Delaney, who's the real-life daughter of Mrs. Brown star Brendan O'Carroll.
Morning, Mammy.
Good morning, Trevor, son. Toast.
And her husband, Martin Delaney. The dodge involves their wages or fees going from the production company to a UK company, then offshore to a company each has in Mauritius. Those companies then loan money to the actors' personal accounts, tax-free. Take Fiona Delaney. In 16 months, her Mauritian company lent her over £360,000. None of the actors answered our questions. I caught up with Fiona Delaney. Hi, it's Richard Burton from Panorama. Can I grab a quick word with you? As she arrived for filming at the BBC in Glasgow. Can you tell me about your tax code? Do you get paid in Mauritius, don't you? What's all that about? Do you? And then the loans. Do you pay those loans back? I don't think you do pay them back. Is it a tax dodge? Are you a tax dodger?
I don't even know who you are.
I'm from Panorama. Are you from Mrs. Brown's Boys? And you're a tax dodger. That's not very funny at all, is it? More names from the Paradise Papers. More revelations still to come. Richard Bilton, BBC News.
Well, the Labour Party has renewed its demand for a public inquiry into tax avoidance, which is legal, and tax evasion, which is not. And the Prime Minister, Theresa May, said in response to these revelations that people should be paying the tax that is due. Our political correspondent, Vicky Young, has the reaction from Westminster.
Once again, the secrets held in offshore tax havens are raising questions closer to home. Have governments done enough to make sure everyone pays their share of tax? And wealthy individuals, including the Queen, have been dragged into the affair. There's no suggestion she's avoided tax, but today the Labour leader was asked whether the Queen should apologise for her private estate using offshore trusts.
Anyone that is putting money into tax havens in order to avoid taxation in Britain, and obviously investigations have to take place, should do two things: not just apologise for it, but also recognise what it does to our society. Who loses? Schools, hospitals, housing, all those public services lose.
There you go.
Later, a spokesman for Mr Corbyn insisted he wasn't calling for the Queen to apologise. The Prime Minister insists she's continuing the work of her predecessor, David Cameron.
So we have seen more revenues coming to HMRC over the last few years, since 2010, £160 billion extra that they have been able to raise. But we do there's already work that's been done to ensure that we see greater transparency in our dependencies and British overseas territories.
Order. Urgent question.
The leaks prompted an emergency debate in the Commons, where Labour called for a full inquiry and public lists of company ownership.
Why will the government not insist that our overseas territories, that our tax havens have to have public registers of beneficial ownership? Why will they not do that now?
Ministers insist that this information is available to the tax authorities, and today HM Revenue and Customs told MPs they'd investigate the Paradise Papers, promising to chase down those who try to hide money offshore and evade tax. Every extra pound that's paid in tax is, of course, good news for the Treasury as they wrestle with the country's debt and increasing claims for more funding for public services. But ministers know that this is a question of fairness too, that the idea of one rule for the rich and one for everyone else is extremely divisive. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the Paradise Papers also include revelations that President Trump's Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, has business links to Russian figures who are currently under US sanctions. Mr Ross has told the BBC that there was nothing improper about his investments. He also said he was optimistic about a free trade deal between the UK and the US after Brexit. Mr Ross was speaking to our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
He has friends in high places, the highest in fact. The President of the United States considers Wilbur Ross one of his closest allies. Today, in London, and defending allegations that his links with Russia were uncomfortably close. I asked him whether a connection to the Russian oil firm Cyber created a conflict.
Our government has not, thus far, made the determination to sanction them. So there's nothing wrong with it. The fact that it happens to be called a Russian company does not mean that there's any evil in it. Where there is evil is the misstatement that I did not disclose those holdings.
Mr Ross said he had fully notified the Office of Government Ethics about his business interests. I asked him whether it was time for all major companies to pay more tax.
The right way to deal with it, I think, is to provide incentives that make the US the attractive place to domicile. The President's idea is buy America, hire America, be American.
And therefore pay more tax in America?
Yes.
If we could move on to Europe, what type of relationship would be most advantageous to the UK in terms of its relationship with the US post-Brexit?
Well, the UK right now inadvertently has much higher taxes on imports from the US than the US has on imports from the UK. That's because the UK is bound by the EU system. So we would like to see those barriers come down, come closer to free trade. The EU talks a good job of free trade, but in fact it practices extreme protectionism.
I interviewed Mr. Ross here at the American Embassy. He certainly wants to put any controversy about the Paradise Papers behind him, and is actually here in London to sell a positive vision of a post-Brexit Britain with a free trade deal with America. He told me he was confident that such a deal could be signed. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
And you can find out much more. There's more analysis to all the background to the Paradise Papers. Online, it's at the usual address there for you, bbc.co.uk/news, and the links are there to the various parts of the papers too.
This could be a bit of a game changer.
Let's turn to